to Talk with Anna Mansager. Today we're talking to one of my friends, Rachel Ambrose. She has been published in a couple of things, and these are short stories, correct?
Yes. They are short stories. One is a personal essay, and mostly short stories, although I am working on novels. I've done NaNoWriMo. I love NaNoWriMo, but I have yet to actually go through the second draft revision process of any of my novels. So
we'll be focusing on your short stories today.
Yes.
So one of them was 2014 A Year in Review.
Yes.
And for that, you wrote something focusing on two women?
Yeah, so 2014 A Year in Review was a brainchild of Matt Potter, who's with Pure Slush, their publishing company out in Australia. So what they wanted to do was basically take each day in the year 2014 and assign a writer to write a story about each day in 2014. So there were, I believe, okay, so obviously there were 12 of us. There were like 31 of us. And so we were all assigned a particular day within the month. So I wrote about January 8th, February 8th, March 8th, etc. And so I wrote about what happened to my characters on each of those days.
Oh, okay.
And all of the other authors wrote about what happened to their characters on all of the other days. And so it was posted online in real time, so the readers could read along literally as the stories were happening in real life, like the characters were concurrent with their own lives. And so that was a really, really awesome project. And so basically it's like a 12-story, 12,000-word cycle of stories of what happened to the same cast of characters throughout a year.
That's a really fascinating idea.
Yeah, it is. It was really cool.
How was that?
It was a lot of fun. It was interesting because we didn't have to write the stories all at once. We could kind of come back to them. Like, there were deadlines throughout the year, and so it was really interesting to go back and, read through your previous month's story and be like, okay, well, this is where my character is. This is my end goal for my character. How do I get her there? And so it really taught me how to navigate through the world of plot to a specific endpoint. So it was a really, really good experience. Matt Potter's a brilliant editor.
So what were your characters up to on the 8th of every month?
So my characters, my main character was a 20-something girl who started the novel off pretty disoriented and directionless and was depressed, and by the middle of the year had gotten into a whirlwind romance with a guy and then broken up with him and then got a good steady job with a really great boss who really believed in her, and then finished out the year much more together and more adulty than when she started.
Huh. That's really interesting. Is it possible to read that somewhere?
Yeah. So there are there's an ebook version. There is a print version. And then I also believe the stories are somewhere on the Pure Slush website. There is also, one of the really nice things that Matt did for us was he, at the end, as a surprise to the authors, he put all of our stories together in our own personalized book, of which I have one copy, because he gave everybody a copy of their own stories.
That's great.
In their own, tiny little printed chapbook.
Oh. So you tend to focus, not exclusively, but you do somewhat focus on queer characters a lot. How did that come about? Because you're actually the first author I've talked to so far that has some kind of focus on queer characters rather than just they're in the ether somewhere.
Yeah, I'm queer. I'm pansexual, so it sort of made sense to write about people who reflect my friends and the people that I hang out with on a daily basis. That's not to say that I don't have any straight friends, because I totally do. But I just felt like having sexuality be talked about in sort of a casual sense instead of this is what the whole book is about.
Yeah.
would go a long way toward normalizing and breaking down stereotypes of LGBTQ people.
Because a lot of times with LGBT books, they do kind of focus on like the gayness of the person.
Right. Like, you know, the coming out story is always such a big deal. It's like the whole book, and it's like, well, actually, in the course of a person's life, the coming out part is actually a rather small section.
Yeah.
And then it's, oh, what do I do with the rest of my life now that I'm out? Okay, there's a whole house for me to play, and now that I'm out of the closet, where am I gonna go? What am I gonna do? So I think that exploring that in fiction is really interesting. But just in general, I try and include diverse characters in terms of race, sexuality, mental illness, mental health, neurotypicalness, neuroatypicalness in my stories. Yay, social justice.
Do you think that that sort of like casual LGBT characters is becoming more normalized slowly?
I think so. I also think that it's really good to have characters, especially in young adult fiction, who do struggle with their sexuality as a main part of the plot, but not necessarily focusing on the coming out part.
Because you can still struggle once you're out.
Right, exactly. There's a whole mess of things to struggle with. Suddenly it's not like you're out and all of your problems about being a queer person are solved. Now you just have to deal with them and like maybe go to therapy or talk to your friends or talk to your family or have hard conversations. There's a really good book called If I Was Your Girl by Sarah Farzan, I think her last name is, about an Iranian American girl who is in high school and she goes to boarding school, and she meets this girl who is also seems to be into girls, and so she's coming to terms with her sexuality at that point, and she meets this girl and she's like, oh, cool, somebody like me, and so they have like this massive like bonding experience, but then it turns out that the girl that she really wants, her name is Saskia, turns out that Saskia is like this massive, like emotionally abusive, horrible person, and the main character like has to figure out a way to get out of that. Yeah. Like with, and not completely damage herself in the process, and not completely damage everybody else around her in the process. Right. So there's a lot to focus on apart from this character is queer.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about what you're currently working on? I know you have a lot of you do a lot of flash fiction, which I find extremely fascinating. I've never been able to quite work that one out. And you have some other supernatural stuff going on.
Yeah. So I've done LJ Idol, Live Journal Idol, for the past 3 or 4 seasons. It's basically an internet writing contest on LiveJournal. I know nobody uses that site anymore. I do, and maybe like 100 other people do. But so it's basically like every week you're given a general topic and a deadline, and you're expected to fulfill that deadline. Hi, puppy. And if you submit your piece, you get feedback on it, which is really, really valuable, because everybody else in the competition are also writers, and so they're able to look at your work from like a very interesting perspective. And then at the end of the deadline period, at the end of the reading period, all of the entries are in a poll, and the person with the lowest amount of votes goes home. Which sounds really mean, but it's really not. The community is really great. And I really hope that the showrunner, for lack of a better word, Gary, ends up running an 11th season, because he thought that the 10th was going to be his last. And there's been some rumblings about maybe this is not the end, so we can hope. So it's a really good way to get a lot of work generated quickly. Mm-hmm. And deadlines are my friend. So if I know that I have to generate X amount of words, X story by, okay, good, now you have 3 days, go do, it's much more likely to actually make me sit down and like put pen to paper. So I did that like for the first like quarter of this year, and I did NaNoWriMo last year, and so I've just taken that first third of a novel out of its drawer again because I'm on Tumblr, and a lot of posts on Tumblr are like, oh man, like I wish X novel existed that's about X concept, and one of my friends sent me a post that was basically like, oh man, I wish that there was a book about a girl who moves into a haunted house with a queer lady ghost, and they go off and have awesome ghost adventures. And I went, that's my nano novel. Someone wants to read my novel and doesn't know it yet. I have to go finish this. So I'm going to try and finish that in the next couple of months.
Great. Well, good luck with that.
Thanks.
Can't wait to read it. So this has been Rachel Ambrose. Check her out on, what was the website called again?
Pureslush.com.
Pureslush.com. Definitely check her out. She's very talented. I'm Anna Mansager once again. You can find me on Twitter at LionessGoddess. And are you on Twitter?
Yes. You can find me on Twitter at Victory Whiskey.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.